paper and just ask everybody for their phone numbers and their emails and to stay in contact. And from that, we just started literally showing up. I immediately connected with a university student. She's a professor now at San Francisco, Dr. Camacho. I immediately connected. So students, know your power, for reals. Because that student got me so fired up. She was like everywhere, Dolores, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. And, connected me to the schools and everything, and the family members started growing, and the students embraced us like you would not believe. It was just such a organic movement that transpired in everybody working together. And then now today, I'm a core member of the Mandela Campaign. I'm Director of Community Engagement with the Bail Project and continue on my work with California Families Against Solitary Confinement. And I'm also the chair of the Probation Oversight Commission. So I go into the halls and camps in LA County with the youth. And it's been phenomenal working with the youth and bringing about change, hopefully working towards decarceration for the youth. And every Christmas he dresses up as Santa Claus. And we watch the kids, here they are, you look at them, they're supposed to be hardcore gangsters, right? But then you take them a gingerbread house to build, and you see that for the first time ever in life, they've never done something like that. And you see them just experiencing a part of life that they never had the opportunity to experience. And you get to see them for who they really are, not what the news sensationalizes with the overcriminalization, especially, we see it more and more in communities of Black and Brown, and I could just go on and on once I start talking about the youth, because they just have my heart.
I don't always dress up as Santa Claus.
On behalf of everybody, I want to thank you, because, you're doing a lot of work, and as a youth that was previously locked up and they didn't have that support, only when it came to us, them helping, restorative justice helping us, that doesn't mean a lot, because we didn't have that back then. So even now it's changing, they're trying to do more, so that's very much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Before the hunger strike gained some traction, this is more or less for you, did you guys try anything else, like other methods that were a little bit more rioting, like riots or anything like that, to get your message across, or was it just the hunger strike?
No, I mean, I was in prison almost 40 years. And during that period of time, we tried hunger strikes, work stoppages, anything and everything we could do. Litigate it. There's nothing that I could think of right this moment that we didn't try in order to change the way that the Department of Corrections was indiscriminately locking people up. And we had tried hunger strikes before. The difference between the ones before and the ones that changed the fabric of California, United States, and other states and other countries was the fact that we did a non-hostility pact for this one. Meaning, after being locked up in a cell next to somebody who was a different race, and that was the only person you could talk to, we learned that we had no differences other than the color of our skin. But other than that, everything about each other's lives was similar. And we found first an understanding and a common courtesy, and then we found our enemy's humanity. And once that was done, we realized that we did not have to starve ourselves alone, but that we can collectively get together and possibly change our circumstances or die together in separate cells. And that's what happened. That's the difference between these three hunger strikes and the ones that had taken place for decades prior to that when I was in prison, or the work stoppages, or anything else we changed.
Thank you, Jack. The next question I've got is, what does it take emotionally and strategically to sustain a movement when the people at the center of it can barely communicate with the outside world? And I also kind of want to add on to that, what did the day-to-day communication kind of across cells look like during and through the strike?
What it took. First of all, like Dolores mentioned, it wasn't just one branch of this movement. It wasn't just the prisoners inside. It was the families outside, and there was a litigation process that was going to be taking place. All those three things working together contributed to the outcome that eventually was the third hunger strike. But for inside, I can speak about myself. There was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of people in favor, and there was equally amount of people in it against it. Because, like I said, we had tried hunger strikes in the past. So someone would say, "We've done that. They don't care about whether we die or live anyhow. So how is that going to help us? We're just going to all die." And then we started realizing that those would be our terms. If we died, it would be because we tried to make a change, as opposed to just sitting in a cell and allowing them to kill us slowly and replace us with someone else. And we were successful, unlike those in Ireland who did the same thing and passed away. But that's what the inspiration was. But no, it wasn't, okay, let's all go. Let's all do this together. It was something that began to roll and become like a snowball. It was eventually 30,000. But the first one was 6,600. The second one was 12,000. And it was the third one that had 30,000 people. And I don't want to ruin the film for you, but there was something that happened that opened the eyes of people outside that were legislators and things like that to consider more deeply our plight.
I also wanted to ask, so what does it look like for individuals that are basically, why did you guys think that it was so problematic that something needed to be done about it for somebody that doesn't have maybe exposure or experience kind of with the system? I know that solitary confinement sounds scary, but what kind of consequences did you see maybe in the people around you or hear about? Just the experience of solitary confinement.
So, I mean, we can say solitary confinement, and then you have to understand what that is. For me, in Pelican Bay, it consisted of living in that cell that you've seen on the screen. There's no windows on that cell. I can't see out. There's no windows in the block, so I can't see out. And the yards, you've seen what the yard looked like. So the only way I could see out is if I laid flat on the ground and stared straight up in the sky. Even the air that I was breathing was pumped into me from a hole carved into the wall. Now, solitary confinement in and of itself, for me, did not necessarily impact me initially. But after 1 year, after 5 years, after 10 years, after 30 years, it starts to weigh heavily on your mind, and you start to question your ability to retain your sanity. While hundreds of people around you through those years lost theirs, went crazy, started to cut their wrists, tried to hang themselves, jumped off over the tiers, would sit there 1 minute and then start rubbing human feces all over themselves. Insanity was something that was ultimately the outcome if you didn't die first. That would be the finality of it. And I reached that point where I said, okay, I'm starting to go crazy in here. And I told myself, just go crazy, because you won't know you're even in solitary confinement no more. Just lose your mind. And whatever happens after that, you'll never know, so do it. Unfortunately, that's the first time my mind listened to me, and it didn't do it, and I had to do the time in there. But it's crazy. It's hard to do solitary confinement time.
I got another question for you. Since 2013, there's been a policy shift. Prop 57 expanded educational access, some reduction in solitary use. What has actually changed for the people inside, and what has been just repackaged?
So, the system has changed as a result of the hunger strike. In fact, there's some great change has taken place in some areas. I hadn't touched a human being in decades. But as a result of the hunger strikes, I was able to go out and personally hug my mother and my sisters. They started having, for people that were married, family visits. They could be in a trailer with their wife and with their kids and literally share a table, a meal, and be human for 2.5 days. They started emptying out solitary confinement units. They closed Pelican Bay. Well, not entirely closed, but they extremely limited it. There's still all people in solitary confinement, but it has changed the contour of the California Department of Corrections. And the Department of Corrections has changed the name of solitary confinement to something else. But I mean, there have been changes, and there has been positive impact as a result of the hunger strikes, but there is much more that needs to happen.
I think the hunger strikes brought about significant change, not just on a local, state level, but on a national level. Now there's a national campaign where over a dozen states are working on reforming or ending the use of solitary confinement through the Unlock the Box campaign. The hunger strikes also brought about significant changes with the laws and legislated. It empowered legislators to start moving on laws that were going to get people out. Jack is an example of Prop 60, for instance, but just shout out to somebody here in the audience, Stavo, that helped him to get out, and if it wouldn't have been for his help. So, you know, even inside, people helping each other, because he was denied 10 years before he even went back to board. And through Dao's assistance, he was able to petition for an early review once he did get out of solitary confinement. But so many laws have changed significantly to we are seeing people coming home that would have never have had the opportunity to come home before. We're meeting their families. They're coming home every day. We're getting news of somebody new. And yet they are still holding people in solitary confinement. There is still so much work to be done. And what recently transpired was the governor of Newsom said that solitary confinement doesn't exist anymore. They no longer have the SHU program, which is the security housing unit, but they have the RU program, which is restrictive housing unit. But yet we have went into facilities, and if you look at these facilities and you talk to the people, they are being held in perpetual isolation. So while it's documented in a name change, the cell still exists, people are still languishing in perpetual isolation. Jack went over the RU, restricted housing unit policies, verbatim, pages and pages and pages. We highlighted those documents, and we spoke with Secretary McComber and pointed out everything that could be taken as subjective, everything that was going to be utilized in one place and different in another. So really, in all reality, there have been no changes to the SHU other than a name change with the RU, and that's why you have to pay attention to the words in policy. And it's not just about pushing policy, it's the implementation. Nobody should be working on any policy without an implementation added in writing of the oversight and the implementation and who will follow that through, and it has to be the community. You cannot rely on the carceral system to bring about change that they're the ones that implemented in the first place and have fought so hard to keep. And that's just what I think.
Real quick, you all touched on a lot of different topics. I know, Jack, you mentioned, like in the beginning, the amount of prisons that existed and the amount of universities. Right now, I think there's 23 CSU campuses, and about 10 UC campuses, and that I'm aware of, there's still about 35 prisons that are in functioning. And so that gives us a little visual of like what we focused on and how backwards the system was, especially from the beginnings in the 70s and 80s when these institutions were barely being built. We touched on the recidivism rate. We were talking about that before we started the program. If you all are familiar with recidivism is the rate that calculates how people return to prison within the first 3 years of being released from incarceration. For somebody without a degree of any sort, the average recidivism rate in the United States is about 60% right now. For somebody that only has a high school diploma, their chances of returning back to prison is about 50 to 70%. When you get an associate's degree, that drops down to about 30%. When you get to a bachelor's degree, that drops down to about less than 5%. And when you get to a master's or doctoral degree, it's about 0%. And so that shows the value of education and what that's doing to transform the system. And that's all thanks to the great work that individuals like yourselves have been a part of. Lucas, being able to bring such exposure to communities all around, people that would have never had an idea that this even happened. And being able to influence a young man like Miguel and the type of impact that that's had without us even knowing about you all, for myself, for somebody like Davo, and how this has reshaped both the institutions inside and how it's reshaping institutions out here to this day. We thank you for the work that you've done, for the impact that you continue to have on our community and members of the impacted community as well. We want to also invite our audience and invite you all to ask. We have about 10 minutes to invite you all. If you have any questions and you'd like to ask, any burning questions from what you've heard so far, this is the time that we'll open up the floor for you all to also ask some questions.
Yes. My name is Luis. I'm studying for paralegal. I'm doing this for class, and obviously I want to learn. And my first question is, there's two extreme in the criminal incarceration. I'm going to talk about, in the case of El Salvador, they have extreme torture prisons. That's one. But on the other hand, I think this Norway, one of those countries in Europe, which their prison is like an island. They have like a mansion. The prisoners there live like a king. So my question is, what is the balance for you, or what system or incarcerating system changed the conscience or might help to change the conscience of the prisoners when you had those two extremes? You mentioned one of the extremes that you were in a hunger strike. I guess that's more according to El Salvador. But on the other hand, the other extreme is the Norway prisoner system, which they have a mansion, they have everything, like they live like a kings. What is your opinion?
Well, I've actually visited Norway several times, and I've went into all the prisons in Norway, and I even went into the prison in Colorado where they ended the solitary confinement there. And in Norway, it's a lot different. It's like a community. It's not they're not mansions though, but I guess compared to California prison cells, they are. But in Norway, the general idea is not an us versus them. This is my community member, this is my neighbor. I would treat them no different than I would my neighbor, and the whole purpose is for those people that are incarcerated to re-enter society. In California, we give people, triple life sentences when it's never been known to man to even serve one full life sentence. I mean, the way that we hand out sentences in Norway, they believe people need to be released from custody, and I think they don't, over 20 years, which is still a lot of time, right? But they think that even that, so it's a lot different even in the mindset, the way they treat the visitors, the family members going in, the way that the staff there interact and sit down and eat lunch. And another thing, nobody is indigent in Norway prison. In California, it's like you can be somebody in prison. It's so easy to be somebody. All you have to do is shop full draw every month and get quarterly packages. And then all of a sudden, it's how people perceive you, right? And in Norway, nobody is indigent. Everybody gets a daily, they get an allowance. They have clothing. They have retreats. because it's humanized, so it's a lot different.
So do you think it changed the conscience to a prisoner, this system, better than El Salvador, or no? They're conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, you could ask doctors.
So, I know what you're saying. First of all, El Salvador is not. It's a concentration camp that they just lock you in it, and it's cabo. You just do your time, and you're not treated humanely. You're living in an area where there are 50-something people in one dorm using one toilet. The Norway model teaches you how to become a better community member. You shop for your groceries on your own. You manage your existence on your own. Yes, it's on an island. You got to milk your cows to get milk. You got to do all the things you do, but it's a form of humanizing you and acclimating you to living in a community, as opposed to El Salvador, where they put you in there for 20 years, and if you make it, they kick you out. Who do you want to live next door to? The person coming out of Norway or the person coming out of El Salvador? It's the same idea here in California. If you're sending somebody into prison, then you have to ask yourself, how's that person going to be coming out? And what do you want that person coming out to be like? Do you want that person to be an individual that can function in a community, in a society, and that can contribute it? Or do you want that person just simply to be a more sophisticated criminal? And I think those are the measurements.
So what do you mean by change the conscience?
Conscious means, for example, the gangsters of El Salvador, they cut heads, for example. So they don't. If you release it, they're gonna start doing cutting heads again. They're gonna start killing people again. So or like the Mexican cartels, they're in jail. They bring women, Mexican banda, tacos. They bring that. If you're
basically, like what you're saying is, it's like if you put it like this: if you're rocking on a GP, you're on a main line,
Yeah.
you're doing that. You have to have a certain mindset and a certain, like, everybody has to be on the same conscious path, because you're gonna have to do what you have to do. If you say go to a 50-50, or they're not gonna be on the same type of time they're trying to do their time, they're not. There's more protective custody.
Right.
So it's like when he's saying as a conscious, he means as a whole collective on the way they think and if they're gonna be rehabilitated or not. I just had court, they just said the same thing. They said president and county, that's our punishment. Juvenile hall, they're trying to rehabilitate you. Norway is rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a difference on there too.
Right.
And it's all about, and I know it's about changing your mindset. How do you change the mindset in a Salvadorian prison, and how do you change the mindset in a Norway prison? That's the question here. Which one will change the way a person thinks? And you have to remember, a person doesn't change if they don't have the ability to learn change. If they don't know that there's something more to life than what the life they're living, then they'll never live a different life.
And I think, Jack, the way that you framed it as, who would any of us want to live next to is a really good way to look at it. It's what the real world of it.
Okay.
All right, next question.
Yeah, so do we have anybody else from the guests that want to say anything or have anything to speak about?
So I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned how you almost, you were trying really hard to keep your sanity when you were watching others around you, losing their sanity. So I was curious as to what made you stay sane in solitary confinement.
I did a lot of different things in order to occupy my mental faculties. Okay? I learned how to play chess. I learned how to do law. I used to meditate. I exercised. I read a lot of books. I learned mathematics. I did anything and everything I could do to keep my mind working, so I didn't have to contemplate my existence in that windowless concrete box. And it works sometimes. But eventually even that runs out. So I like to tell everybody when they ask that question, I did all these things. I wrote letters I tried to stay in contact with the community outside, so I wrote a lot of letters. aside from the things I just mentioned. But to tell you the truth, I don't know whether I would have been able to do one more day in solitary confinement. So I'm glad they let me out when they did.
Do we have anybody else that has a question or a comment or just something to tell them?
Thank you for all the work that you all do, and I'm glad, Dolores, you brought up your question, because actually I was going to ask about what your personal opinions are with the language change to the RU, the Restricted Housing Unit. So you answered exactly how I expected. And I think this question might be for Lucas. I understand, just having run the program inside our facility, not very many people from the correctional side are willing to be interviewed and speak and even get exposure and videoing inside. So I'm really curious, one, how you got that permission and CDCR allowing. I know this is a very positive film, so I don't know if that played into it, but I'm really curious how that permission and that allowance for you to go inside and, create this exposure that was very much needed.
Yeah, great question. I mean, part of the reason this film took about 13 years to make was we didn't know how to answer that question for maybe 12 years. And I'll also say, in terms of positivity, yes, this film is about a very heavy issue, very heavy stories, and it ultimately is about how people can come together in collective action and make change, which you'll see if you watch the whole thing. So there is a really strong uplifting element to it. But if you listen to CDCR, if you listen to the official Scott Kernan was on 60 Minutes with Oprah, actually, he says a lot of the changes that happened after the hunger strike were due to CDCR having a light bulb in their head, being like, oh yeah, this is wrong, we should change something, with zero mention of the hunger strike, with zero mention of the class action lawsuit. So our film is actually correcting the record and showing that it's people power that is organizing from inside and outside that actually caused all those changes. In terms of access, I mean, I started making this film about Dolores and the families organizing because I didn't even know how to interview Jack and all the other guys who were hunger strikers. The reason, we were able to interview Jack was because of the hunger strikes, and he was able to get out with Pablo, and it's the reason he's here today. So even that took a number of years, but it was pretty amazing when we could finally sit down in the chair and hear that first person perspective, capture it on camera with no police, no guards, no surveillance.
No water.
Jack sat down in the chair for a very long time with us. And then, we had this question of how do we tell the story inside prison, a place that we cannot film? And that was difficult on a creative level. I always knew this deserved to be a documentary because it's such a powerful story, but in terms of talking to funders, people, it was hard to convince people because I was like, what's it going to look like? What are we going to see? We experimented with animation at one point, which didn't work. We felt it wasn't working for us. And so we eventually uncovered some archival footage. So we see some archival footage that was in the state archives. I was just doing deep research, finding that exists. It was filmed by CDCR kind of for propaganda type purposes, promotional purposes, but given to the state archives in Sacramento, and now it's just, it was digitized at some point, but it's just, it's public record in California. So that's how we found some footage. There's some confidential footage that was leaked to a journalist we were in touch with, which you'll see by watching the film. And pretty much at the 11th hour, we were almost done editing. We finally got access to film in some of those empty units. And then we also did recreations, where we built to sell and we worked with some actors, not really showing their faces, but just abstractly to recreate some of that. And what you're seeing is all of that being intercut together. So you can, if you pay close attention, you can notice what is the archival, what we filmed really inside Pelican Bay, and the recreations. And that's all edited together.
Anybody else?
The unofficial map of the
Thank you. I don't want to. I got two questions. I don't want to spoil the end. But for one, what does the after party look like for the Emmy? And can you guys share a little bit about the? Again, I don't want to spoil it, but the love story that comes out of this. Because I know some people don't know.
Well, Jack and I are married, so That's why I was staying over there, to keep it a secret. Said my colleague here. And so some of that is shown in the film that, that when Jack paroled, it was funny because when we heard he got a date, at that time nobody was getting dates. And so we had heard the families, we sent for his board transcripts because we were going to investigate, like, okay, what did he say in board? There was some suspicion. And I thought his statement was so profound when they asked him, why didn't you move yards to a sensitive needs yard? And he said, the problem is not the yard that I'm on. The problem lies with me. And why would I change a yard when I first need to change myself? And so he got him a date. And then he started coming to events. We started hanging around constantly. And then from there, things transpired. And now we've traveled the world. We've been to like 35 states, 7 countries. We're getting ready to leave to Amsterdam Monday. That came up from a vision in Pelican Bay. He saw National Geographic with pictures of Amsterdam and said he was always going to go. So that's a little bit about where we're at there.
Yeah, we were fortunate that the film was recently nominated for a Peabody Award and 3 documentary Emmys. So, keep your eyes out for that. And for us, it just means further exposure for the film, more people learning about this really powerful, transformative story that we hope continues to inspire people around the country and around the world.
Just to leave us, I know we're at time, with maybe some empowering thoughts of, because this is amazing for us to kind of get our feet wet into advocacy, and I'm interested to hear from each of you, like, what can we as community members continue to do to advocate for the thousands of folks that are still incarcerated?
Well, I think, one of the things to continue to advocate around policies that are working towards decarceration and restoring, like community-based organizations and community support. If we invest all those millions of dollars that they use towards incarceration and put that into communities rather than, investing in incarceration. But also, if you want to get involved with the Mandela campaign, you can get my email and join the listserv. Caesar has it, and Carla, definitely. We are not working on legislation this year. We are still, educating and empowering, and Caesar has been a part of that, Davo as well. And we will be coming back with a new bill this coming next session. So please, get involved and stay involved in that.
And also remember, like Dolores had said when she started getting involved in that, your goal is not necessarily to make a big old giant movement, but just to seek change. And once you start to seek change, if other people see that and believe in what you're doing, they'll come along with you as well. And it has the potential to change everything.
I also think when looking at social movements, it's important to think about how everybody can play a different role based on your strength and your skill set. Not everyone has to do the same thing. Not everyone has to be the face. Some people play more background roles, more creative roles. For me, before becoming a filmmaker, I was just a videographer. I was filming a lot. I like to make short videos. And so that's how I ended up getting connected to the story, just being a volunteer media maker, community media maker, working with community organizations. So that's just one example. That was my role. There's a lot of different roles I can play, and it's good to know yours, figure out yours. Mm-hmm. And then, there's so much I could say on this topic, but I'll just be brief. For me, I'm a filmmaker trying to figure out what my next project is. I'm looking a lot right now at immigrant detention because it's basically a mass incarceration moment right now. They're opening 60 plus facilities, these warehouses. I'm sure everybody in this room knows it's really crazy and intense. But because there's been such a strong movement for decarceration in California, there has been decarceration. It's very much an ongoing battle. But California has closed prisons for the first time since that massive boom in the 80s, which is something to be acknowledged. But several of those empty prisons are being turned into immigration detention centers. So I've been focusing on California City and the folks organizing around the California City Immigration Detention Center. So there's a lot to look into.
Well, at this point, we have to get ready to wrap up. We want to thank you all again. Thank you so much for taking the time, driving down and coming down all the way from LA and Orange County area. We appreciate you. We appreciate you spending this time with us, putting us up on game, sharing with us some of your experience, and also, continuing the work that you do. Thank you so much. At this time, if you all want to shake hands real quick, exchange information, take some pictures.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, please feel free to take some food.